Well, welcome. It is great to have you here today. As I look throughout this audience, I see that there are many, many great mothers out there. Thank you, moms, for how you formed and shaped us in so many ways. Hey, I want to draw your attention to a couple things as you exit here today in the lobby. I believe one of the most transformative acts that we can ever participate in is the act of reading the scriptures daily. I think it has the ability to change us radically, change us as husbands, change us as moms, change us as wives, friends, family members. And so here's what we're going to do over the course of this summer. We're encouraging you to not just read through the Gospel of Luke, but to write through the entire Gospel of Luke. We have these are called Luke journables, and basically you write every day just a little portion of that letter from the Gospel of Luke, and by the end of the summer, you've written through the entire book. And so here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. After you leave here, go grab one of those, and then there's something else in the lobby. You're like, hey, that was really odd. He's preaching with a sippy cup or bottle up there, and then I saw bottles out there. In a political climate as we are in, this is a need that I would deeply encourage you to consider, especially with what's happened over the past week with infighting within our government about abortion. Here at Redemption, we believe in life. We want to encourage life. We want to encourage women who are in a really hard place, because we know sometimes that's what happens. A woman gets pregnant, she's in a tough place, and so we want to support pregnancy resource centers. And right here in town, there's a pregnancy resource center called A Woman's Choice. And so here's just one of the little things we're doing throughout this year to encourage our continual involvement and support of women in a difficult place. We're encouraging everybody to grab one of these bottles, and from now till Father's Day, fill it up with loose change, dollars, maybe a check, and then bring it back by Father's Day. And 100% of what you bring back will go to investing in A Woman's Choice, because again, we want to create and cultivate a culture of life, and we love how they are serving our city. So, we are now in our message for today. Now, here's the thing. We're putting a pause button on 1 Corinthians chapter 6. You may say, why are we doing that? Well, that passage particularly was about, and will be about, joining yourself with a prostitute. Didn't feel like that was the best Mother's Day message, and so we put a pause button on that. We'll jump into that next week, okay? So if you're like, I really want to hear about that, we'll come next week as we continue our journey through 1 Corinthians. And we're kicking off a brand new series called Meant to Be. And this is for everybody. So this is about love, sex, marriage, and singleness. And so all of that, when it comes to love, we're going to be covering that over the next 4 to 5 weeks. So I would encourage you to be here for next week as we kick that series off. But we will find ourselves in the Old Testament today. Here's what I know if you love your kids, and I don't care where you fall in the faith spectrum. So you may come in here today and say, hey, I'm here because my mom wants me here, or I'm here because somebody drugged me in here. I'm not a Jesus follower. But here's what I know even about you. You deeply desire to raise kids, if you have young kids, to be good people when they become adults, right? I mean, if you love your kid, you want them to grow up and be productive citizens. You want them to grow up and have a good job and have character and have morals. All of us want that. So how do we pass that down? Now, if you're a Christian, we have a completely new set of goals when we come to faith in Christ. We not only want to send good adults into our culture, but we want kids that turn into adults that deeply love Jesus. We want to raise the next generation of Jesus followers. We want our kids to grow up and turn into adults and be God-fearers and God-worshipers. So if you're a Christian, you deeply want that. So how do you pass that down? So we're all trying to pass something down to our kids. Doesn't matter whether you're a non-Christian or you're a Christian. We're trying to pass that down. So how do we pass down anything? Morals, faith. What's really fascinating about this passage we are about to read is sociologists today are finding out, yes, this is the best way that the transmission of faith goes from one generation to the next generation. This is how believing parents who love the Lord pass down a faith that is vibrant to their kids so that when they become adults, they have a vibrant faith. So we're going to learn a lot about how we pass the baton of faith on. And so we're going to read Deuteronomy Chapter 6. To give you some context, Moses has all of Israel gathered. They have left the slavery they were in Egypt. They're heading to the promised land. He has just given them the 10 commandments, and then he has them all gathered, and he says this, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command to you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be on the frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So he has the attention of the entire nation of Israel. They've just received the commands of God. He is calling them to obedience, but he's also teaching them much about how we transmit the faith from one generation to the next generation. The first is he's going to start with this prayer. Now, the prayer at the very beginning of this passage is called the Shema, and it is, Hear, O Israel. And they say this, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Now, this prayer is a centerpiece to Jews even today. Literally, Jewish people have been praying this prayer for thousands of years since this time. And they'll pray it in the morning. So when they wake, they will pray this prayer. Hear, O Israel, the Lord God is one. They'll say the whole thing. In the evening, when they gather, they say this prayer. Before bedtime, they say this prayer. 3 times a day, a good practicing Jew says this exact prayer. They even do it in significant moments in life. And so if you have a loved one and death is imminent, guess what they pray over their loved one? This prayer. The most holy day of the year, Yom Kippur, guess what prayer they pray? This prayer. It is the centerpiece to their life and to their prayer life and to their faith. And just listen to the declaration. Now, think about this. Israel is leaving Egypt, which is polytheistic. It's going to the promised land surrounded by a bunch of people that are polytheistic, meaning they worship many, many gods. They have many gods in their religion. And so they make this bold declaration that the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That there is one true God. And then our allegiance is to that one true God. We are to love him with every part of our being. We're to obey him and follow him. And you're like, all right, what does this have to do with parenting, and what does this have to do with Mother's Day? Well, if we're talking about how we transmit the faith, I think Moses hits the nail on the head that first and foremost, parents, you have to have a genuine faith yourself. If you look at verse 5 and 6, 7 times he says, you or your. And when you look at the form of that, it's singular, meaning when Moses is saying, hey, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, he's not talking about corporately. He's saying individually, specifically, you. Yes, you, not everybody else. You are to love the Lord your God. Now, in our English language, when we say you, we can be referring to everybody, right? If you're from the north side, it's y'all, right? If you're from up north, it's you guys, right? But Moses is not using it in that fashion. He is saying you, nobody else, drown out everybody else. You are called to love the Lord your God. Here's what I know about kids. Kids are not fooled by performance. They're not. If we have a marginal faith, if we have a faith that only makes sense on Sundays, the best we can do is pass down a marginal faith or a Sunday-only faith. That's it. Parents, hear me on this. You can only give what you have. If we want to see kids that love Jesus, that fear Yahweh, that know that there's the one true God and they love him with all their being, it's going to be because we have one generation who already loves the Lord and is passing that down. That love is transmitted from one generation to another generation. Parents, first and foremost, your job is to love God with everything. I love what Paul Tripp says. He says this. He says, it is a waste of time for us parents to think about parenting or strategies for parenting without first examining ourselves. Listen, parents, you could think through and know and even implement the best parenting strategies. But if you have not first examined your heart, our kids will see through the hypocrisy of what we're saying and how we're living. We have to not just believe, but also practice a genuine faith if we want to see our kids raised up to be a generation of Jesus followers. That's how it works. You and I cannot give what we don't have. It doesn't matter how much we know about parenting. If we don't love the Lord, I don't expect our kids to love the Lord. It's almost like writing a check that's going to bounce. If we're like hoping that our kids are just going to kind of fumble their way into loving the Lord without us actually doing that and practicing, it's like writing a check, but that check will bounce because it's insufficient funds. We have to have love and faith that's genuine to give that to the next generation. So parents, please hear me. Your faith needs to be vibrant for you to pass that down. We live in a culture of a lot of church hoppers and shoppers, and they go to this church because it's got a better youth ministry. My kids, I've heard this so many times, my kids really like this kids ministry, which is great. I actually think kids ministries that pursue excellence and are teaching the faith, they are awesome. But my primary question to every parent is, but where are you growing the most? Because again, your heart in this matters most. Doesn't matter how great the kids ministry is or the student ministry. Is your heart growing in love and affection for Jesus? And if so, you're likely in the right church. There's a lot of things that we could do, bells and whistles we can have on ministries that at the end of the day will not turn up kids that love the Lord. I know many kids that were involved in incredible student ministries and youth ministries, and yet as adults they do not love the Lord because their home didn't love the Lord. So after giving this prayer and really focusing on you have to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, then he starts talking about parenting strategies, right? Then he says, go ahead, verse 7. He says, you shall teach them diligently to your children and shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. Parents, you have been given this awesome but yet really weighty responsibility of shepherding the next generation. And you've felt both of these, right? Sometimes parenting is exhilarating. When we watch our kids succeed, when we watch them accomplish something great, when we see how they love other people or they do well academically or maybe on the athletic field, and we're just so proud. This is like an awesome parenting moment that I get to witness, and I love this. But we also know that there is a very real weight to parenting. That as we navigate life with kids, it's not always accomplishments and feats. There's some very low, difficult moments where we have to shepherd hearts through some of the most difficult things that we go through, that they're going through, and you feel the weight, parents. You know, when your kid is going through something, like as a parent, you just take that on your shoulders and you feel that. He wants the nation of Israel to feel the awesome responsibility, yet the weighty responsibility of parenting. How do we pass down the baton of faith? Well, I think if we own the faith, too, we have to accept this responsibility of passing the faith down. Parents, you are the lead theologian of your house. You're the primary caretaker. Parents, you are the primary teacher, and life is a classroom. Why is life a classroom? Well, think about as you navigate life with your kids. And you're going through all of these circumstances and situations. Life is always begging them, like, how should you interpret this? How should you evaluate this? And parents, you're on the front lines teaching them how to question, interpret, and evaluate life all the time. Guess what? I'm not always there. Pastor Austin, who's been leading our student ministry, is not always there with your kids. Ashley, who leads our kids ministry, she's not always going to be there. No, some of the most normal parts of life, guess what? Pastors and leaders aren't around, but guess who is? You. It is interesting. He's talking to parents saying, you should teach diligently to your children. Again, it's singular. He's saying, your children, teach them all that I'm commanding you. He doesn't put the primary responsibility, listen to this, on the religious leaders. Though we do that sometimes in our culture, that it's the church. It's their responsibility to teach my kids about Jesus. Or we do it in the schools, like I put my kid in a Christian school or in this environment. It's their job to teach my kids how to love Jesus and follow Jesus. Well, it's this ministry over here. No. What we see, parents, there is no one more influential in your child's life than you. No one. In your presence or your absence, you are incredibly influential. I know dads who have never been around their entire kid's life, and they're the most influential person in their kid's life. Because you and I as parents can never pass the buck. In our presence, in our absence, in our good, and our bad, we are the most influential beings in their lives. That's it. And parents, you have to accept that responsibility. Now you go, all right, well, you do have a student ministry that meets on Wednesday nights. You do have a kids ministry. And so what about them? Are they just irrelevant now? Like, I just own all this. Should I even be coming to church, to be a part of God's people? Do I even need this right now? You could be asking that question. And so I want to read to you Christian Smith. He's a sociologist, and he has spent literally decades talking about how the faith is transmitted from one generation to the next generation. He has written many kinds of books and articles on this, but listen to what he says. Non-parental influences, congregations, youth groups, religious schools, and so on, pale in comparison to the influence of parents. Again, parents, you're primary. That does not mean that these other factors are irrelevant. Sociologists of religion call this religious channeling. The idea is that parents channel their children into involvements and relationships that reinforce, not replace, their more direct parental influence. Channeling means subtly nudging, introducing, and steering children in the right religious directions. It creates opportunities, makes introductions, and encourages involvement. So what he is essentially saying is, again, parents, you're the primary influencer of your kid's life. But especially when they're younger, you can guide and direct them, right? When they're really, really young, and we have all the way from 8 years old to 20 years old now, and so we've kind of been able to see the range all the way up to 20. And by the way, you're like, oh, he must be an expert on parenting. No, I am actually preaching out of a need of grace in parenting. Listen, we don't know how the Padgett kids are going to turn out. I mean, so be in prayer with me about how the Padgett kids are going to turn out, because it's pretty iffy right now, okay? I'm just going to be honest with you. It's their parents' fault. But what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to guide them and direct them. So when they're really little, guess what? I have a lot of control on the kids they spend a decent amount of time with, right? I want to do everything in my power to encourage healthy friendships, not bad friendships. I can control certain environments that they're in when they're really little, right? And as they go into their teenage years, I can still control a little bit about their environments that they're in, the people that they're around. And so for my kids, like, hey, like you come to our services, you're a part of our student ministry, you're a part of our kids ministry, you serve the local church. Like at the youngest ones at their age, like, it's not up for debate. You just do that. That's part of our life. That's part of us channeling them in the right direction, because I know this. I want them to love the bride of Christ deeply when they get older. And if I don't model that, encourage that, nudge them towards that now, the bride of Christ will not be important to them when they get older. Because while I'm the primary influence, I know that this is not irrelevant in their life. Matter of fact, sociologists will say this, that if you have parents that are pointing their kids to Jesus, right? And then you have a support system of other people that are pointing your kids to Jesus, there's never a guarantee, but in all likelihood, they're going to grow up and love Jesus. And so everything else doesn't replace, but it certainly reinforces and encourages our kids to love and follow Jesus. Now, as they get older, the friendships that they make, you start to lose that control, that guidance, and then they become adults. But what we model and encourage on the front end of life bleeds into the next stages of life. So parents, this isn't rocket science. I mean, honestly, like when we're talking about how to be great parents that pass down the faith, this isn't rocket science. Like, you own your faith genuinely and faithfully. You accept this responsibility that you are the primary influence. This stuff isn't like hard and very technical, but yet in practice, it is very difficult. And finally, I think you see one more thing that surfaces in this, and it's quite clear. He's explicit. He says, you teach them. You talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise. Having meaningful conversations with our children matter. We are communicative beings because God is a communicative God. God is not silent. God speaks. He communicates. We communicate with him through prayer, through his word. And we are wired to be beings that communicate back and forth. And I would say this, if we have rich, meaningful conversations with our kids, it's literally life-changing. And you're like, this is too simple. No, this is how God's wired us. This is who he is. I want to read to you a sociologist again, Christian Smith. He says this: a trait of parents who successfully pass on religious faith and practice to their children is that as a normal part of life, family life during the week, they talk with their children about religious things, what they believe and practice, what it means and implies, and why it matters to them. In such families, religion is part of the warp and woof of everyday life. It comes and goes and talk easily. It's not compartmentalized in certain slots of the week, nor is it unusual or an awkward topic. Fascinating. When we own the faith, it's genuine, it's real, We take the responsibility of being the primary influence, and we're doing everything in our power to give them an opportunity to see, hear, and respond to the gospel. We're pushing them and nudging them in the right directions. And then when we have rich, meaningful conversations with our kids, in all likelihood, there's no guarantees, but our kids continue in the faith long after we're gone. Rich, meaningful conversations. I think there's two key components if we're talking about rich, meaningful conversations with our kids. The first is, and it's pretty obvious, but you actually have to be present. If you're not present and available for your kids when they wake up, when they're sitting around the house, when you're walking and doing life, when it's time for bed, if you're not around, you cannot have rich, meaningful conversations. And how about this? Not just physically around, but you're actually emotionally available to your kids. See, I think what he has in mind, Moses here, is not a monologue either. It's a dialogue that's happening between kids and parents. That they're at the house and they're sitting down and they're talking about the Lord, not just on Sundays. They're talking about the Lord on Mondays. They're going for a walk on Tuesdays and they're talking about the Lord. On Wednesdays, as they're going to bed, they're having these meaningful conversations and prayers to the Lord. And it's just woven into the fabric of the family. Rich, meaningful conversations. Parents, you should be a place where your kids feel like it's safe and okay to talk about the faith and ask really tough questions. I've seen this with my own kids. Man, they can ask some of the toughest theological questions that like I don't have an answer for. But like, praise God, they feel like they can ask me these really tough questions even when I don't know the answer. I think this is what Moses had in mind. It's going both ways. They're asking questions. Life is begging to be evaluated and interpreted. And I'm helping guide them as they're asking these important questions to the faith. So parents, when's the last time you had a really rich conversation with your child? Some of you are in here and your kids are grown up, right? They're adults and now they have kids. Grandparents, your role in having rich, meaningful conversation with your grandchildren matters tremendously. Look at the research. If you have parents who own the faith and grandparents who own the faith, in all likelihood, those kids will own the faith. But I'll say this to parents, while you move into a different stage as your kids become adults, they still long to have rich, meaningful conversations with their parents. That doesn't change because we become adults. So there's some stages of life, like when our kids are really little, like they're just with us and they're seeking us, right? Like it's easy when they're really little. And then as they get older and start heading into adult years, you have to chase after them. And parents, from everything I've seen and studied, you continue to chase after them all of your days. And you chase after a rich, meaningful relationship with them that requires rich, meaningful conversations with them. It's not rocket science. Own the faith. May it be genuine. Accept the responsibility of being the primary influence. And next, have those conversations with your kids, those dialogues with your kids. And that baton of faith, it passes down. Now, here's where we're going to end. We're going to end on the gospel. You know, you talk about parenting, and there's one kind of guilt. And here's the guilt. I have been imperfect, and my kids have major gaps. Like, let's be honest, parents, how many times in parenting your kids, you're like, how bad am I screwing them up? Like, I know I'm screwing them up, but like, how bad, Lord? Like, as a pastor, as a friend, like, I've asked that question. Because you know you've done it imperfectly. And so we need the grace of God to cover those gaps. The places that we've failed our kids, the places that we haven't had rich, meaningful conversations, or haven't been warm to them, or haven't been present to them, or rejected our responsibility. Like, I need the Lord to parent them there. And parents, that's one of the things that will keep you on your knees. Like begging God, like, Lord, cover my kids in your grace. And the places I was inadequate, that I failed, Lord, would they please follow you even there by your grace and by your mercy? Parents, I would encourage you to pray for grace and mercy in your kid's life. And then second, since we've imperfectly done this, there's a lot of guilt and shame that comes with this topic. And this is often where I struggle the most with guilt and shame, because I know how imperfectly I've done it. And I'm like, Lord, I failed you. I failed you. Even in those moments, God's grace is sufficient. If you're here and your kids are adults, I've seen this so many times, that you have regrets and shame and guilt when you think back. You think about how you could have done it differently. What could have happened? Friend, if you're there, it's right there in that place that the grace of God meets you. See, when he died on the cross, it wasn't just for our sin, it was also for our shame. That we're actually freed from our shame and guilt because of what he has done. And we're not going to stand before our almighty creator, if you're in Jesus, and he's going to nitpick and chase after you with all the ways you failed as a parent. No, if you're in Christ, he looks at you as perfect and complete.